speed. Touchdown.
Welcome into the latest episode of Mac and Mose. Andy McNamara, joined by the editor of GoDucks.com, Rob Mosley. We are here to recap Oregon's win at Washington. We'll also get into sort of a mid-season report card, if you will, for the Oregon Ducks. This was a big game for Oregon. It was a rivalry game. I said it early last week that perhaps maybe one of the more important early or mid-season, regular season games that this program has played in a while. And everything really turned out well for the Ducks.
Yeah, I think coming off the Utah loss, the Washington State loss, there was a lot of question about the direction the season was going to take. Would this even be a postseason team? Which was a mighty fall from a team that we were talking about maybe getting it back to the playoff, which now, in hindsight, given the losses the Ducks suffered, seems a little silly to have happened. But hope springs eternal in the offseason, and everything was rosy then. But I think now you beat Washington, you get back on the winning side of things. You feel like, this is a team that still has legitimate postseason aspirations. There are no sure things on the schedule anymore, as has been the case for the last 2-3 weeks. But I think with Vernon Adams coming back and playing as he did, making some big plays, giving the offense that just explosiveness it lacked a little bit, along with Darren Carrington, things have taken a turn for the better.
Washington came into that game with statistically the top defense in the Pac-12. Oregon was able to go down the field on the opening drive. Vernon Adams to Darren Carrington, who sort of under the radar in the return of Vernon Adams. The return of Darren Carrington was a really big factor in this game. If there were any concerns, if you're an Oregon fan, it was that the offense did continue to sputter a little bit at different points of the game. They had a nice, comfortable lead that they gave away toward the end. 2 weeks in a row, you started to really wonder, is Oregon going to be able to hang on and get this one done?
I think end of half, 2 weeks in a row, really. Ducks, probably could have put a couple more points on the board at the end of the first half. Certainly kind of having Washington make a game of it at the end was not a perfect scenario, but ended up pulling this one out on the road in a rivalry game after losing one at home. And Washington State maybe looks like a tougher team, but you'd think at home that's kind of an easier quote-unquote situation in which to hold on to a lead. Ducks didn't do that, but then went on the road in a rivalry game and were able to hold on. So that was a good sign. I think Scott Frost talked afterward about this team maybe not having the kind of the killer instinct that some last year's team had, probably because some of the veterans that were lost. And did they show a killer instinct against Washington? No, but I think they saw what it takes to win in a situation like that. And so next time they're in that position, they'll know kind of how to put the hammer down.
In 2 weeks in a row, I think the coaching staff would concur that the Oregon Ducks played hard. Now, you say they lack the killer instinct. I think some of that is just still trying to process everything and execute the way that they're supposed to. But they played really hard. The defense, again, was able to bounce back. Some changes in the secondary, which really paid off in this one. Maybe not the best passing attack that they were up against in the Washington Huskies with a true freshman quarterback. But at the same time, Tyree Robinson looked comfortable at corner. Yeah. Juwan Williams had what I felt like was his best game as a Duck at safety. He started, he made plays. The long run that Washington got for the touchdown, that was a backup safety. Yeah. So that really kind of got juked out of position there and allowed that play to happen. So it wasn't perfect, but it was definitely an improvement over what we've seen.
Yeah, I think Arian Springs is starting to kind of be grounded a little bit. I think he only got targeted twice in that game, so I think he's starting to build up some confidence and play with some confidence that teams are having to respect after being targeted earlier in the season. Tyree Robinson looks like a good fit at that corner, and he plays the boundary corner to the shorter side of the field where you need a little more physical guy to hold up against the run, and he's that. Springs can be on the field side of the more open field and really be the cover guy over there. But Charles Nelson makes another start there, goes out early. So yeah, Ducks have to rely on their depth even more. You mentioned offensively too. They're playing without Matt Pearson. Tyrell Crosby ended up going out of the game prematurely. So you're trying to spackle together some things at a couple of key units, and so in that regard, the bye week comes at a really good time.
It really does, and it points out also how important it was for Oregon to be able to throw the ball effectively, because when they lost Crosby, and they're down to sort of a real patchwork O-line like we saw so much of last year. All of a sudden, Royce Freeman wasn't having the same amount of success. He was still getting positive yards, but they were runs of 1, 2, 3 yards instead of what we've been used to seeing out of him. Taj Griffin had a kind of a nightmarish game from a statistical standpoint, 8 carries for -4 yards. Was really having a difficult time being able to cut it upfield. Some penalties as well because the offensive line a little bit inexperienced in terms of working together, but the passing element, to have that deep threat, to have that part of the game plan back with Vernon Adams. Dwayne Stanford only had 1 grab in this one, but it was a monster catch early in the game on that opening drive. Darren Carrington, 5 catches for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. Braylon Addison again with a great game receiving. Would have had another catch, almost a spectacular grab on a perfectly thrown ball by Adams that got left off the stat sheet. Vernon's completion percentage wasn't the greatest, but he had some drops in there. Yeah. He never, I felt, put the ball in harm's way when he was throwing it.
Yeah, and just the ability to make something when things broke down was just, something the offense lacked without him. I mean, I believe he had 6 or 7 completions of 25 yards or longer, all on 3rd down. So, and all on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12
Not a comfortable
situations.
just drop back and look around.
Right.
It was one of those.
Because again, with the offensive line in the situation there were some things that broke down quickly. Even that 3rd down play on the last offensive snap of the game was designed to go to the left side of the field. Protection immediately breaks down. Vernon tries to scramble out. He's got a tight end open. Doesn't make a great throw in that situation. But turned it into a play where at least the opportunity was there to try to get some yardage when things broke down because of the protection so quickly. So just that dynamic ability to make something out of nothing. And then the Huskies talked about it too. It's just, that's a hard thing to practice for and game plan against because it's so improvisational in nature. You just don't know what to expect. And that he could get on the move out of the pocket and hit guys on the money, give his receivers chances to make plays, as we saw in Darren Carrington's first touchdown. I mean, there's nobody more acrobatic on the roster in terms of going up and getting the ball. That said, you look back at Dwayne Stanford's catch against Washington a year earlier on a Marcus Mariota pass. It was as acrobatic a catch as you'll see. So there's a lot of guys that can do that, but I do think DC is consistently the best on this roster, and so a welcome return for him.
You're watching him in fall camp and throughout practice while he served out his suspension. There were times in August where he was the best player on the field,
For sure.
in my opinion. He might not, if you looked at his stats in terms of speed and 40 time and all that stuff, throw it out the window because he's football fast, he's incredibly elusive, he's long, he's athletic.
Just
he
the
can
body
jump,
control in the air.
The control, I mean, everything. And when he gets the ball in his hands with both feet on the ground, he can make guys miss and he can score. We saw it against Florida State last year. We saw it in the Pac-12 championship game against Arizona. I bring up Florida State because of the athleticism that they had on defense, and DC was able to really carve them up. I mean, he's a special talent, and he's somebody that I think really, as we transition maybe into talking about where this team is going the rest of the season, he could play a big part.
And credit to him too, because he had to earn his way on the field. It wasn't just the suspension and you're good to go. I mean, he had to clear some hurdles internally in order to get himself back on the field. So certainly dug himself a hole by getting suspended, but dug himself out too. So credit to him in that regard too. But yeah, as you go forward and you look at, Charles Nelson obviously is such an asset on defense. I mean, I do think it makes sense to play him over there as much as possible. But if you can add Darren Carrington into a receiver mix that is now down Byron Marshall and Charles Nelson, but now includes Carrington and Stanford and Addison and Devin Allen, Jalen Brown still kind of lurking down there as a guy who could potentially contribute with more opportunities.
Kirk Merritt showed himself
absolutely.
A couple times against Washington.
Absolutely, needs to get more consistent. I think particularly in practices we see with his hands still are a little inconsistent, but so explosive when he does get the ball. There are options there. So, going forward, I would certainly expect, keep Charles on defense because he's needed there. And I think with this Robinson, Nelson, Williams, Springs group, with Ugo as coming in for nickel situations, maybe you see some stability there now that's going to be tested by, gosh knows, with Cal coming up in a couple of games. But that receiver group looks pretty good too.
Ugo Amadi, 2 interceptions in the first half of the season, none bigger than the one at the end of the Washington game to really put that on ice for Oregon. a guy that is a true freshman that has impressed his teammates throughout the spring and then fall camp, and he's taken his lumps a little bit in games, but he's a guy that I think has got a ton of experience now and maybe is ready to take that next step to help this defense.
I just think he's unflappable. He's not cornerbacks. They have to have a lot of confidence, and sometimes that can almost come across as like false bravado, which you understand because the guy's got to try to build himself up. I don't think he gets too high or too low, regardless of the game situation, but he does maintain a confidence in himself, and even if he gives up a play, it's, hey, I learned something from it, good things are ahead. That's been his attitude all along. And so perhaps you saw that pay off, late against Washington. He kind of kept his head up and made a play. So, again, at this point, I think you go with that Springs-Robinson group until they give you a reason not to. But, Ugo's coming along, for sure. There's no doubt about that.
We talked about the secondary. The defensive line, probably the most consistent element of the defense through the first half of the season. They make it through relatively unscathed from an injury standpoint. They should be healthy. DeForest Buckner is probably playing his best football right now. He's healthy. He's an absolute beast out there. The last 2 games, he has 3.5 sacks. All of a sudden, he's second in the Pac-12 in sacks. He's got 9 tackles for loss. There were some great photos that Eric Evans and Chris Polson took at Washington of him being double-teamed and holding 2 guys off at the same time. He got a hands to the face penalty in this one that was unfortunate in its timing because Tyson Coleman had stripped the quarterback and sacked him. But because of where he is as a player, it has allowed Alex Balducci and Henry Mondu and Tuitalia to all of a sudden become really, really effective down linemen on the defense.
I feel for DeForest because owing to some of the missed tackles early that contributed some big plays and some of the breakdowns of communication in the secondary, I mean, the numbers aren't pretty overall for this season for this Oregon defense. And so it's gonna cause him to not get the recognition he deserves. You're starting to see a lot of mid-season all-conference and all-America teams come out this time of year, and he's on the all-conference teams. People internally in the Pac-12 recognize how good he is, but he's not getting really any attention nationally. And hey, yeah, I mean that's, for a defensive guy, that's hard anyway, particularly when you're playing on a defense that statistically is struggling as much as Oregon's is. But I think you'd be hard pressed to find a guy who play in, play out, does his job, regardless of what's going on around him, as well as he does. He's just such a force and just an important leader for this group because he's setting the tone and showing a lot of those other guys. It's going to have to be Mondo's deal next year. T.J. Daniel, Canton Kamatule. I mean, it's going to be their team next year. And so you couldn't ask for a better guy for them to be learning from right now.
On the offensive side of the ball, the O-line has been relatively stable through the first part of the season. The real issue has been at the quarterback position with some uncertainty surrounding who would play ever since the fourth quarter of the opening game against Eastern Washington. Nobody wants to make excuses or hear about excuses, but clearly that affected probably at least a couple of the games that Vernon Adams could have really helped this team with his talents and was just unavailable because of the finger.
Yeah, is it great that you have to go out and get a graduate transfer to be your quarterback for 1 year? No, that's not a perfect situation. But that was the situation. The Ducks did do that. They brought Vernon Adams in. It was clear at the end of preseason camp he was the number 1 guy. He was the starting quarterback, regardless of the circumstances. And I don't care what team you are, you lose your starting quarterback, you're going to be in trouble. That was going to be the case when, if and when Mariota, had to miss starts, with the knee problems he had a couple years ago. I mean, he played through those, and you see why. I mean, your starting quarterback there's probably always going to be a significant gap between your starter and your backup. And if there's not, it's probably because your starter's not very good, not because you have the world's greatest backup. Mm-hmm. So, and the Ducks suffered for that. They did. And now I think as we go forward, we can kind of see, okay, is this a team we all thought it was going to be? I'd be shocked at this point. I don't think anybody expects them to get back into the Pac-12 North race and contend for a conference title, particularly with what Stanford's doing right now. But the window's open, and there's still some uncertainty. We've talked a lot the last few weeks about uncertainty about kind of what this team is and who they can be, and there's still a little bit of that. But it's in a lot more positive vein now than it was a couple weeks ago, again, when we were wondering, is this even a bowl team?
Royce Freeman, his first half, despite the struggles with the passing game, I think what makes his numbers so remarkable and the numbers of the running backs in general so impressive is they've had to really carry the load, and they've been able to do so when the opposing side has pretty much known what's going to happen. So really productive first half of the season for Freeman. He's just 3 yards shy of 1,000. He's going to become only the 4th player in Oregon history to have back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons. Taj Griffin has been a really good spark as a true freshman. Kenai Benoit, who we mentioned back in the spring, how he looked different. He's been effective in his role. Tony Brooks-James, probably the odd man out right now in the rotation, but he's had moments through the first 7 games as well where he's looked the part.
You want a guy who could use the bye week. I'm sure it's Royce Freeman. I mean, his body he's just taken so many hits because he's had to carry the load. And I wonder what the offense is going to start to look like now as we go forward, if Vernon can stabilize things the way we think he can, because the Ducks have done a lot of things with 2 tight ends, using a lot of Johnny Munt and Evan Bayless together and using them to keep them in and run block for Royce Freeman. Well, to the tight ends now, if Vernon's in there and the offense can become a little more multiple because you have a better passing threat, can the tight ends get involved more in the run game? I think we all thought we were going to see a lot of 3, 4, 5 wide receiver stuff, this year, based on the depth of talent at receiver and the fact that Vernon Adams is a guy who can sling it. Haven't seen a ton of that. Maybe that opens up more too. So, and that would take some of the pressure off the running game and Royce Freeman, which they've earned at this point because Royce did yeoman's work through the first half of the season. But we could be in line to see a lot more balance on offense and a lot more throwing the ball, which eases the burden on those guys.
81 carries for Royce Freeman over the last 3 games, which is a lot for any college running back, and he definitely took some punishment, delivered some punishment as well. But a guy among many that can definitely use a little bit of a break here. It's not a true bye week because the Ducks play on a Thursday night next week. We tape this on a Tuesday, so it's a little bit slower pace. There's some coaches out recruiting. It's not a normal practice week, but it's more normal than it has been in past years, where the bye week has been sort of conditioning and get your legs back. This team really, it's a program that doesn't talk about injuries, but we can talk about the fact that they're pretty healthy for this stage of the season when you consider that this is such a brutal sport.
And Mark Halford said today there was a group of guys that isn't really participating in practice right now. But the reason that's notable is because they are practicing this week. Some weeks you go out there, it seemed like 5, 6, 7 years ago you'd go out to a practice week like this and you'd see basically the scout team guys getting to run Oregon stuff. It'd be like a week of spring drills for the scout team guys. The vets are all sitting out watching. The walk-ons and the scout team guys are running through Oregon stuff after playing other team schemes out on the scout team the whole season, and they might even have like a little scrimmage at the end of the week. Within the last couple of years, it was common during a week like this to go out to practice, and it's just guys in t-shirts really stretching and doing a little bit of conditioning, but just trying to keep their bodies loose, but not doing a whole lot. When you're 4-3, you don't have that luxury. These guys are scratching and clawing for every advantage they can get in a season that has turned into kind of a rebuilding year. And, so they were out practicing on this Tuesday like it was a Monday and running through some things, a lot of second and long situations, really drilling some stuff. And, there were some guys that sat out, but not that many. And there were some big-name guys that were going through those situations too. And I think particularly for a guy like Vernon Adams, who's still going to be working himself to get back into timing and rhythm and all that. Having a few extra practices before that Arizona State game will be big.
Well, this part of the schedule for the Oregon Ducks doesn't get any easier going down the stretch. And they find themselves at 4-3. It was expected to be a much better record based on the opponents that were laid out in front of them. It didn't quite work out that way. Well, now this part of the schedule, who knows? Maybe they flip the script and all of a sudden it's like, wow, Oregon stumbled against the teams they shouldn't have, and all of a sudden came to play against the teams that were going to give them the biggest amount of problems. So it's still a lot on the line. It's made for maybe not an ideal, but certainly an interesting season to this point. And we look forward to them getting back out on the field Thursday night in the desert. The Ducks will travel down to Tempe. That is a week from Thursday. And Rob and I will be back before then to preview that matchup. Until then, if you have any questions, comments for us, you can get to us on Twitter. I am at McNamara UO. He is at Duck Football. Until next time, we'll see you.
It's for the touchdown. It's through 50. He's got the speed. Touchdown.